Yay, I'm so excited. This is going to be such a good hour. Okay, so I want to start off. I know I brought this up to Paul recently when I saw him. By the way, Paul and I are in the same city, for all of you who might
Boulder.
not know. We are in Boulder. He's probably that way about 2 miles, which is pretty darn exciting, which means I get to see Paul more often. But one of them, before I saw Paul recently, one of the last times I saw him was when we had the graduation of the first Flinn Scholar class, and we went on a Colorado River rafting trip. And we got to spend a lot of time together because Paul and I were the wackos who like to be in the front of the raft, in the scariest spot, facing the big hole on Lava Falls. And in that journey, at one point he turned around and looked at me. He's like, you know what? He goes, you go work on Wall Street. I'm gonna drive boat or be a captain on boats, and you can come and charter my boat. That'll be our future. Fast forward a few years, and I learned Paul really still likes boats. So I wanted to hear, first of all, just like, Paul, tell us what's going on with your boat love.
Sure. Well, thanks, Sarah, and Ann, and everybody else who sets these cool events up. Yeah, I have a serious canoe problem, amongst other boats, but um, I love whitewater canoeing, and it goes back to those days in college, and certainly that initial whitewater experience with you, Sarah, and other alumni um, of the Flinn Scholar crew from 1986 when we went down the Grand Canyon. But I love solo whitewater canoeing. I also love tandem canoeing. I spent many other good times in boats, including teaching scuba for a number of years. So I used to pilot boats throughout both the Sea of Cortez in Mexico and then also in the Bahamas when I was living in the Bahamas. I no longer, do the scuba diving, but I still do canoeing. And yeah, Sarah, you are welcome to come canoeing with me anytime you want to. We'll go find some waves again together.
Yes, we will. Apparently, there's places all around Colorado, which I have never done this, so I'm very excited. So that's kind of past to present, but like going back, because we'll have current scholars listen in on this as long as as well as alumni. So I'm curious because I never heard this from you. You're in the inaugural Flinn class. What
Mhm.
drew you into the Flinn scholarship? How'd you learn about it, and like what made you leap at it, if you remember digging the cobwebs?
Sure. No, that's great. I think it was a counselor at Kofa High School who introduced me to the concept of the Flinn Scholarship. She's like, there's this new scholarship that's starting. You should take a look at it. And I applied and was really fortunate to get an opportunity to interview as a finalist. And I remember being really impressed by the trickiness of the questions. Um, and so that's what kind of drew me in. And then I really, I grew up in Yuma and Tucson and was excited to go back to the University of Arizona in Tucson from graduating at Kofa High School in Yuma, Arizona. And then never looked back. It was the combination of the opportunity to learn with other Flinn scholars and develop friendships with so many of that initial class, but also to get to know the wonderful staff and the events that they put on in that first year that kept me there. I miss John Murphy. I miss Barbara Barnes. They were just wonderful in the way that they launched the beginning of the program. And then, to have an opportunity to study abroad and really to explore my curiosities. I felt like I had the time and the resources to be able to explore many different majors, and I explored way
You
too
did.
many majors. Like almost all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I learned about it. Was a high school counselor.
And I'm not sure exactly the first time I met you, but I do remember specifically you are the person who had a physics teacher who you loved, who was running a study abroad thing that was, fairly unusual, and that's the one I ended up going on.
Oh,
Um,
did you?
yes, and
That
that
must have been Ray.
yes. And so keep in mind, like the thing that I remember most is when Paul's like, "Oh, I'm majoring in physics and English." And I was just like, wait, what? And for me, I was in like engineering mode, which by the way, I then obviously changed, but it was like the first, I think, glimpse I had of someone who's like, I can, be left brain, right brain, or I can do whatever I want kind of thing. And I don't think I had considered like double majoring or, I'd say watering my soul in lots of different ways. So let's talk about your multiple major phenomena.
Well, I think I started off in engineering too. I think it was chemical engineering. At first, it was like, what can you make lots of money doing? And then I was like looking at like graduate textbooks, and I'm like, oh, I don't think I want to make plastics. And so then, it was like environmental, ecological and environmental biology or something like that. And I was there for a little while. But then physics and astronomy really called to me, and so I did complete a minor in physics and astronomy, and that's when I got a chance to do some research with Ray White. He was big into photometry, of like looking at the light curves of variable stars. And so we had a cool project to study these RR Lari variable stars. And I got telescope time up on Mount Lemmon, and I drive my Jeep up to the top of Mount Lemmon, night after night after night. You have a schedule, certain weekends, certain weekdays. And every single time I'd go up there and I'd set up the photometer, it'd be freezing cold. I'm like, I'm going to get my data tonight. And then there would be like light cirrus clouds that would blow over. And so like for an entire year, I drove up to Mount Lemmon and tried to get data with a photometer and got zero data. And that's when I realized I didn't have the patience to be a natural scientist or do observational science. So I turned to English and ended up majoring in English and American literature
Logical turn, logical turn.
and
Okay.
minoring in in physics and astronomy and Spanish. But yeah, it was really great. I'm very curious and really enjoyed wandering around through the various disciplines as an undergrad.
So I know, like, I mean, students now are the same as students then, which is, like, it's hard, in my opinion, it's hard to figure out and know what you want to do, in college, what you want to major in. You have no idea what you're going to do the rest of your life. And in my case, for sure, like, I mean, who knows what really goes on in a PhD program until you are in it. So when you were in undergrad and getting to that point of, okay, what do I do next when I graduate? Like, first of all, what would you tell people who are like really struggling with figuring out what major they should focus on? And then, that's an advice thing. Then the second part is how did that translate for you into choosing your next step post graduating with Flinn?
Yeah, I'm really a proponent of following your curiosity and your heart and your passion, to try to find your purpose and letting that kind of guide your path. It's taken me lots of wonderful and bizarre adventures in my life, but for me, it was beginning to understand the role of culture within these larger systems of history, of power, of power relationships between different groups of people. Um, and so that called me to a graduate program in comparative literature. I also was really called to be able to continue to kind of self-design my program of study like I did as an undergrad that made me take 5 years to graduate. So comparative literature allowed me to study in different discourses and take classes in a variety of different departments in the humanities, across different languages, across English and Spanish. And then that graduate program evolved to become even more interdisciplinary. And so while my master's was in comparative literature, and looked at both Chicana literature in the 19th and 20th century and U.S. Literature in English. Then I moved to comparative cultural and literary studies, which allowed me to study even more broadly. And by this time, of course, I had been playing in mini bands and had a small recording studio, and so turned to understanding contemporary culture and the ways that the music industries, as kind of larger systems of economics and power, shape, but also enable local communities to form scenes and individual artists to try to make it in this larger pop culture scene. And so ended up writing my dissertation about that. And so this is not the sort of approach to graduate school that one pursues.
Typical.
You're trying to make money or to try to, have a typical career, but it's led me in wonderful directions since then.
So, okay, I can't imagine. First of all, in your field at that time, did you have one dissertation advisor? How did it work? Did you have multiple or?
I had a chair of the dissertation committee, but then I had a dissertation committee that included people from anthropology, from media arts, from marketing, from kind of the more cultural studies fields. Um, uh, and so it was really a multidisciplinary dissertation committee that guided my dissertation.
And how was there like unanimous support? Like, oh, you want to write about rock bands or music bands and this comparative literature studies? They just said go ahead, or was there pushback?
Well, my original, the person who got me into the comparative literature program was very much against me writing about music, but I did not include him on my dissertation committee. We remained friends and, hunting partners and that sort of thing. But no, I didn't want him near my interests. But yeah, I think you have to form a dissertation committee that really understands your interests and helps to push you in different directions and also particularly has the network that if you're looking to have a PhD that results in a typical tenure track profession, to make sure that your dissertation committee has the right networks and connections to the different fields and institutions that will help you to get a job. So I think so much of graduate school is about, and undergrad and life generally is about building networks and relationships. So you want to use that structure for that purpose as well as to guide your study.
So I mentor a bunch of, I end up getting connected to a bunch of younger people who are very focused, and I think it's realistic, and they're like, okay, well, I need to get a job when I graduate, and what's a good place to get it? And like you mentioned, you started off in engineering, and I did too. And at that point, I was a math person, so it was logical, but that was also like the way tech was more in the last 5 years. Like if you graduate and go into engineering, there are plenty of jobs and you know what you're going to do kind of for the rest of your life, or you think you do, until you look at the graduate book and go, no thanks, like you did and I did. But now, I mean, compared to your situation, like did you necessarily have a job in mind when you were exploring through grad school and stuff? Like, did you have a
No,
logic, like this is what I'm going to do, or you just went for what you're interested in?
I just went for what I was interested in and figured out, I figured that I'd figure it out down the road. Um, and so that's worked for me. I really believe in the meaning and the purpose in life and in profession, and so wanted that to sort of be my guide um, rather than a clear career path. Um, so yeah,
And
your uh,
so
your your results may vary with my approach.
so how'd you end up in the Bahamas?
I was getting close to so I had to leave Tucson in order to finish my dissertation because sorry, there's a siren in the background here. Um, I had to leave Tucson in order to finish my dissertation because I was having too much fun playing in bands. And so I went up to the White Mountains and, I stayed in a trailer and wrote my dissertation and helped with the reintroduction of the Mexican gray wolf into Eastern Arizona and Western New Mexico back in 98. In 99, I was ready for a job, but I was like, I don't want a typical tenure track job. And I just happened to be browsing through the Chronicle of Higher Education and saw a job at the College of the Bahamas. And I was still teaching scuba and so on. And so I'm like, that sounds like the right thing to do. And so I applied and got a job at the College of the Bahamas and worked there for a bit, helping them to move from College of the Bahamas to the University of the Bahamas to build curriculum and wrote a proposal for an interdisciplinary program in Bahamian and Caribbean cultural studies. And I lived right on the beach. It was sort of the Magnum PI life. There was a rich couple that had a 80-acre estate, right on the shore of the Caribbean, and they were gone for almost the entire year. It was just me and the Haitian gardeners next to me that had the run of the estate, and it was fabulous. And so taught scuba there, had a sea kayak, paddled between the islands, that sort of thing. And then I got a chance to come back to the University of Arizona at Arizona International College. And that was a really innovative public liberal arts college designed to be the fourth university in the state system. And so that's where I got turned on to the sort of innovative liberal arts learning that's happening at places like Evergreen or Prescott College or Pitzer or New College of Florida, may it rest in peace, Alverno, Fairhaven at Western Washington. They were all part of what we formed there at Arizona International College as the Consortium for Innovative Environments and Learning. The kind of it's like the gathering of the weird colleges. And so
I was
I
gonna
learned.
wait for you to coin that. I wanted you to say it, not me, because that wouldn't be as genuine.
No, it's absolutely true. And so that's where I learned about these different approaches um, to higher education that are really transformative, both for social mobility, people who are looking to be first generation learners and to transform their lives through higher education, but also transformative in terms of the potential of higher education to create leaders who are really trying um, to make a more just and sustainable world. And so that's really been my purpose and my calling ever since.
And we're definitely going to dig into that because that's your theme for sure, for your career. I'm curious, like, you said, I got to get back to Arizona. Do you feel, I mean, was that your ultimate goal or your primary goal, and you like focused on jobs that would bring you back there, or was it just luck? Because like for
Mm,
me, and I think you mentioned this when we talked once, like in grad school in economics, it's the case, and I know several other disciplines there are where you go to grad school somewhere, and if you're going to be in academia, they won't hire you if you're from that same state.
yeah.
So when I was looking at going to get my PhD, I looked at three California schools and then Rochester, and they're like, well, if you want to live in California, which I thought would be really sweet, they're like, don't go to get your grad degree there. Is that the case for you? And then how did that weave into your Arizona calling?
Sure. So I would say it was a combination of intention with luck. Um, the love of my life, Zoe Hammer, was still in Tucson finishing her graduate degree. We had met in graduate school, and so we had a long distance love affair. And so the opportunity to come back and be a faculty person at the University of Arizona was too good to be true. So I had been looking for jobs in the Southwest that would try to get me closer. I didn't. Um, have a hope that it would be at the University of Arizona. But Arizona International College was an interdisciplinary college. And so the very thing that made it unlikely that I would be hired in a tenure track job in a typical discipline, or certainly at the University of Arizona as a graduate of the University of Arizona, um, I think strengthened my hand in that application. I also had done, quite a bit of work in local communities, the arts community particularly, and Arizona International College was very community based in its curriculum. They had a community arts mentorship program where students could study, with any local musician and get credit for it. So both the academic approach that I had taken, sort of in my wanderings as an undergrad and particularly as a graduate, combined with the local connections to community, I think really helped me to be successful in landing that job at the University of Arizona at Arizona International College. Arizona International College also had a very it was very purpose driven. It had a not only an international focus with 6 semester language requirements for all students, which is atypical, even in universities or liberal arts colleges, but also an interdisciplinary curriculum design that was designed to help students understand the significant crises that were developing globally, but also and have continued to develop,
Mhm.
but then in a real problem-based and solution-oriented way that was trying to give students the skill set as well as the creativity, the collaborative skills, and the communication abilities to be able to work together to solve those problems. Um, so I guess that's what what called me, certainly the love of my life, a little bit of luck, and then the accidental preparation in interdisciplinary studies and community-based learning.
And when you took that job, I mean, you you thought it was heading into the university space, and then it didn't work out, but it ended up working out for you, in my opinion, because it kind of got you prepared for your next job. I think you said like you're in administrative hospice or something. It was the best. That was the best term. So
Only once.
can you tell us about like how, I
Sure.
mean, from the surface of it, like that didn't look like a great outcome, but I think it was a great outcome for you.
So what happened was the very first semester, I moved back to Tucson. I was a happy faculty person in my office. I bought a house like, close to where Zoe was living. And and then on October 11th, 2001, right after September 11th, the president of the University of Arizona announced that due to, multi-year budget cuts and mid-year recessions at the University of Arizona, that they were going to have to begin a process of focused excellence by closing Arizona International College. And so, we tried to I tried to rally the troops, other faculty and students, tried to resist that decision, but we were unsuccessful. It was a decision that was supported by the trustees, the regents rather. But then the president at the time called me into his office and said, Paul, you're the sort of leader of the rebellion. So we've decided that we're going to keep Arizona International College open for 3.5 years so the current freshmen can graduate. But we want you to lead its shutdown, lead its teach out of those students. And so, yeah, I described my initial leadership in higher education as administrative hospice. But I also swore that, like, never again shall I be involved in closing down another perfectly good liberal arts college. So it kind of became my calling to try to help small colleges with big missions stay alive. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
So I mean, you clearly love the alternative education models. What do you believe? I mean, I'm sure there's an hour long at least answer this, but what do they get right that the mainstream universities are not getting right?
I think it's a very student-centered approach that meets each student where they're at and helps that student through a kind of process approach to learn how to learn and to build the connections through intentional processes within classes and across classes in the curricular design, the pedagogy, and the curricular design of the full 4-year program that helps them to build their relationships, to get to know themselves, then get to know others, to make a plan, to get to work with community. So it helps students to really develop as individuals and learners. It's a holistic approach. It often is interdisciplinary and allows for students to self-design because that helps them to reflect on their learning and become lifelong learners. The interdisciplinary approach, I think, is also necessary because the crises facing us in the 21st century are requiring interdisciplinary solutions. They're not just going to be physics, or you need to have various fields of knowledge come together in application through collaboration. And so the design of these programs tends to be community-based, to be problem-based, but solution-oriented in that way through experiential learning that allows students to identify problems that are relevant to them, but then also to work with others in their cohorts to build the understandings and the solutions for the problems we're all facing. So the purpose of these institutions that I love is not just about an approach to pedagogy or a curricular design distinctiveness, but also a kind of purpose to try to save the world, to give the students that purpose in their lives too. And I think that's what kind of leads to good work. When you can find a place that people come together for a common purpose, it makes the sort of work that's happening in that organization not feel like work, but feel like something that you would be doing, even if you weren't getting paid for it. And I guess that's the trick that I've tried to solve for, not just for myself in the places that I choose to work, but for the ways that these educational projects create students who are trying to transform the work of the world to make that work for a more just and more sustainable future.
I think like a lot of the like my own experience with Flynn, and I from what I know now that on the alumni council, you know, those those key points that you brought up are pretty much, I think, embedded in a lot of Flinn scholars. And like we, in my time, at least, I felt that we got these doors open to be more interdisciplinary and to like, join the honors college or, meet professors who would kind of chaperone that. If, for the people who are in the Flinn Foundation scholarships right now and, in the big universities, what is the best way that you would advise them to, follow those points that you think are the most valuable and what attracts you to these other institutions?
Yeah, I would, well, be curious, take advantage of all the things that the Flynn Foundation offers. Don't be shy, go to meet people that you wouldn't normally talk to, go to experiences or concerts or lectures that you wouldn't normally go to, and allow your curiosity and your world view to expand. I think that you're right that the Flynn Scholarship calls to scholars who are interested in those opportunities. It's also designed in a way that, is intentionally integrating things like international study and interdisciplinary learning opportunities to try to bring people together for the kinds of conversations that open people's minds, that have them think about things that they wouldn't otherwise think about in their particular chosen field of study. So I think that's part of the genius of the Flynn Scholarship Program design. It's also, I think, always been a part of the intention of the Flynn Scholarship Program to help strengthen the state university systems, particularly their honors programs. And it's really evident to those of us who've been around for a while that that's been entirely successful. So I do recommend getting involved in the honors programs, even if you're not going to try to graduate with honors. Go take those classes that are really intriguing, that fill you with curiosity and questions.
Gotcha. And then um we haven't ever spoken really about what you did for your study abroad. Where'd you go and why and what did you get out of that? Because I mean, everyone I talked to, including myself, found that to be one of the best things that happened to us in our Flynn Foundation career. What was your experience with the study abroads?
From growing up on the border in Yuma and Tucson, I'd always been interested in Spanish, and the cultures that come together along the border. And so I tried to use my study abroad opportunities to continue to advance my ability to communicate in Spanish. So I wanted to immerse myself in Spanish-speaking environments. One of them was in Guadalajara, Mexico. Had a fabulous experience down there studying in connection with the university. And the other experience was in Spain. I had intended to really wander more broadly with the Eurail Pass around Europe, but ended up just falling in love with Spain and Portugal, and spent almost the entire summer in Spain and Portugal, engaged in study and adventure. Absolutely transformative experiences, both of them. Still have friends from both of those international experiences, and yeah, we'll never forget many of those episodes. So it was one of the highlights, but not the only highlight of the Flynn Foundation experience.
Awesome. So you recently got a new job, and I do want to go back to you had a few other really good jobs before this, but because Naropa is here in Boulder, and I think, as I mentioned before, we started, like, I don't think a ton of people know about Naropa. So tell us about your new job and Naropa and what attracted you to it, because it's definitely, off the beaten path.
For sure. Well, so Naropa University is one of those incredibly alternative institutions. Many of them formed in the 1960s and 1970s. There's a number of moments in U.S. higher education where there are these moments of experimentation, and the 60s and 70s were one of those moments. Um, um, Naropa came together in the early 70s. There was a Tibetan Buddhist who had to flee Tibet during the troubles there, and kind of wandered through India, crossed the mountains. It was an epic journey, that sort of thing. Made it to India, then eventually to Oxford University, and then to the United States. Ended up you kind of no longer being a teacher in the formal sense of Tibetan Buddhism, but kind of went more secular. And then came together with the Beat Poets in Boulder in the early 1970s to form first the Naropa Institute and then Naropa University. So it's really the coming together of Tibetan Buddhism with the Beat Poets that sparks when East meets West, this combination of wild creativity and political action with mindfulness. And so Naropa and then Boulder afterwards really becomes sort of known as the center of the modern mindfulness movement in the West. Naropa starts with non-credit offerings, eventually in the early 80s becomes accredited, integrates in graduate studies, is very well known both for its arts programs, but also for psychology and counseling, and related fields. It sort of expands from there. But it's it's contemplative education is what makes Naropa distinctive, regardless of whether it's in the arts or psychology or counseling or other fields of study. Contemplative education combines what I talked about earlier, experiential learning, learning by doing, with conceptual learning, particularly in that East meets West, right? Western science and Eastern philosophy, but then combining that with a real attentiveness to learning about emotions and consciousness, so that students can integrate mindfulness into their learning and into their lives. And what drew me to this now is that we're in this moment of increasing anxiety, of this divisiveness in our society that's really using anger and hatred and violence to drive wedges between groups of people, and not to mention the kind of continuing ecological crises that should be alarming us all, but more and more students are finding themselves in a place of anxiety. And what I see as the sort of magic of Naropa is to give students the ability to move past apathy or anxiety or anger towards courage, towards creativity, towards kindness and the ability to collaborate, and then to join that with understanding of systems of domination and oppression and exploitation, of the various problematic systems that are threatening people and the environment, and equip people both with the kind of mental, emotional, and spiritual and practical, hands-on tools to be able to create solutions that are about, social and ecological liberation. And so that's Naropa. And you can see it in the particular culture of the learning environment, where people are called to express themselves authentically, not just called, but like expected. So it's not just about inclusion and welcoming people regardless of identities, and having a space where all those identities can flourish, regardless of the kind of historical, regional, cultural, the wisdom tradition that people come from. It's very inclusive, but it also, with that kind of radical beat poet expectation that people are going to show up and be there authentically with one another. At the opening convocation at Naropa this fall, there was a tradition that was rehearsed again, where everybody puts their hat or their name in a hat, and then you pick a name out of the hat, and then whoever gets drawn has to create spontaneously a line of poetry, and it's written on the board, and then the
Oh,
next name
Lord.
gets joined. Yeah, and so it results in a poem that then gets put into calligraphy and posted on the wall as part of the archive of Naropa. So it's about that kind of yeah, radical presence and ability to go through the fear to be able to be creative and collaborative together. And that's, part of the community and part of its ceremonies. But then it also allows people to go out into the world and take that into their professions and into their communities to try to spread that magic.
Yeah, it's interesting. It popped in my head this memory. My kids, when they were little, they went to a school that definitely had the science, math, English, all that sort of stuff, but they really focused on performance. And
Mm.
it reminded me of what you just said because like from literally 5 years old, and they're small enough classes and they just constantly got up in front of the room and did something, like whether it was a poem or sing something, it didn't matter if they sang badly, but since they did it from the very beginning, like they just didn't have the fear of being in front of a crowd or just making a mistake by, like what if I make a silly line of poetry for that, Naropa thing. So I think like it's so impactful now when I see younger people who haven't had that experience. Like you just said, get over the fear and then the creativity can come out. Because I think a lot of people are more creative than they think, it's just hiding behind fear. So it's really interesting that they do that in the first day.
Completely, yeah. And I think that um, you can build a culture of educators and then the students, as peers, where people can support one another in moving past that anxiety or that fear to be able to be on the stage together and to improvise and to support one another through that improvisation. Um, and that's a really useful skill. It's like you know, regardless of whether you're thinking about, chemistry or business or psychology or education, what you really need to learn is how to think critically, think creatively, communicate and
Communicate.
collaborate with one
Hmm.
another, and have a real strong sense of ethics and how to behave with integrity. Um, and then you're going to be successful, regardless of whether you end up as an engineer or an educator.
Exactly. So I 100% agree. I'm curious, what does a president of a university do? And like generally, like what is the job description? And then I'm sure it's slightly different at Naropa, just because Naropa is itself. Can you tell us that? And then like what are you hoping to do as a president of this university?
Sure. Um, so a lot of my earlier career was sort of dean or chief academic officer, sometimes called a provost. And that's really much more about the kind of student-facing functions. Um, and so the provost is often the number two and kind of has that job. The president is the chief executive officer of an institution of higher education, and so has that role. You supervise, of course, the senior leadership team. So a lot of the work that you're doing is leadership development, and then you also are the primary liaison in the case of private institutions to a board of trustees. That structure can be different in publics. So you're both supervising as well as leading from below towards the board of trustees. Um, One of the things that I have an opportunity to do at Naropa is to engage the community in strategic planning. And so that's a typical responsibility and opportunity of presidents. It hasn't been done for a while here at Naropa, and it's really a incredibly important moment to have a strategic planning process that isn't a kind of steady state plan, because the environment that we find ourselves in, both in higher education, is incredibly dynamic and challenging in terms of demographics. There's major changes that have been happening and continue to impact higher education. But then there's also the larger regulatory environment and financial aid environment that's happening right now with the current administration. And so what we're using here at Naropa is multi-scenario strategic planning to try to engage the student, staff, faculty, the trustees, the friends that we have in our community, the funders that we have, to think through the various sorts of scenarios, kind of outside the box, right? Both in terms of the external environment and how that may evolve, and what sort of opportunities and challenges are in the outside world, but also what that might look like internally for Naropa as we continue to evolve. Naropa's just turned 50 last year, and the founders said this is a 500-year experiment. So we're trying to use this multi-scenario strategic planning process to kind of build the playbook. One of the most promising scenarios is rapid growth through partnerships. This is a moment of consolidation in higher education, particularly in our sector, and you're seeing more and more small institutions either merge or close. And so Naropa will not close. No administrative hospice here, right? What we're going to do is evolve. And I think that there's a real opportunity for Naropa as an institution that's focused on contemplative education for a more just and regenerative future, to create a larger university system that creates a home, a shelter for other institutions that kind of refuse to bow the knee, to kiss the ring, to give up on things like academic freedom or truth, or the possibility that we can have a more sustainable and just future, and that our students and our future generations deserve that. And so that's one of the scenarios, and there's a lot of excitement both around some of the partners that we've been talking with that would like to join that sort of larger university system, and also support both from our trustees and our student, staff, and faculty. But we're also in the process of change. We've seen before the pandemic, Naropa was 90% in person, many commuter students, but 90% in person. And then since the pandemic, now we have about 50% of our students, undergraduate or graduate, that are studying online in limited residency programs that allow and combine both study at a distance, but also coming together in Boulder or other centers for these intensives.
And is that like attracting, in your opinion, like a new group by having the online presence? It brings in people who would have never come for a full on, like does it
Yes.
grow the pool?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's growing and diversifying the student body, but also as we're able to use more and more remote employees, remote faculty and remote staff,
Mm.
it diversifies the employee base too.
Oh, cool.
It's also it makes it easier for people to Boulder's a very expensive place, right? And so
Hmm.
it's easier for people to afford to work in higher education in places that are a little bit more affordable than Boulder. And so that's true for students as well as for our employees. So it does help us to both imagine a sort of leaner cost structure, a more efficient delivery, but also one that's more effective for supporting and giving access to more diverse learners at the undergraduate and the graduate level, and more diverse employees throughout the United States and the world. Yeah.
Is there a teaching from Eastern philosophy that has changed your life for the better, Paul?
Absolutely. So I was raised as a Lutheran, but then also my family married into Catholic family, and so but it was Christian, and that those sort of particular wisdom traditions. But as I was coming of age, I sort of read the Bible and I was like, there are some really important things in here, particularly the sections on love and forgiveness, etc. But it wasn't, the organized religion wasn't doing it for me. I was also working in a B. Dalton bookstore, for those of you who may remember B. Dalton bookstores. And I came across this person, Alan Watts. And
Yes.
so he was kind of the first introduction that I got to um, a kind of amalgamation of some non-Western thinking. So that would be the first one I would say that changed my life for the better. And then it's been both Eastern philosophies that I've sort of wandered through, some of them Buddhist. I'm not a Buddhist, but I would say I'm like Naropa, I'm Buddhist inspired, and so
Hmm.
my life has been changed by the inclusion and learning from many different wisdom traditions. Um, Most recently, reading some of the teachings of the founder here, Trungpa Rinpoche, particularly liked his take on um, courage, where he's talking about courage and bravery um, and describing it or redefining it as a kind of a complete lack of deceit, particularly self-deceit, but also deceit generally. And I found that just in my own most recent readings of some Eastern thought, that was really useful. And I've been talking about that in terms of the kind of challenges that we're facing in higher education, at Naropa and throughout our sector. That Naropa is uniquely equipped to try to deal with this rapid transformation that we're seeing in our world and in higher education, the community of Naropa, the various constituents, because they have practiced that sort of mindfulness that leads to that courage, and that we can be radically honest with one another about the challenges we face, both in higher education and in the world, and we can be creative together in the way that we create solutions. So there's a couple of examples.
There's
Also indigenous traditions that I've learned from, particularly from various First Nations in the Southwest, the Dene, the Tohono O'odham. I would say those were really important in my development too.
and I have never looked into that, so I'm going to be grilling you on that in a future happy hour. I would also say to everyone, it's so interesting to go to Naropa's website and look at their courses and the course descriptions. Like, I have done this in the past, but I redid it again after I learned that Paul was going there. And it's just fascinating to see. Like, to me, it's like, we're so used to whatever we're growing up in, or like what's offered at your local school and what's offered at the university where everybody else goes is like a regular path. But, you know, just I just think about like, wow, how my life would have been different had I been exposed to that earlier. Like, I spend a lot of my time now in that space, the space that you're talking about, Paul, but not before. So I think it'd be like really great if we could get a little bit more of that diversity across many schools and many geographies, personally. As a high school teacher in Arizona, I'm curious about how to direct the right students to Prescott College as undergraduates, because you were there. I know you don't work there anymore, but what type of students are a good fit? I don't see Prescott College recruiting here in Mesa.
Hmm. Yes, I had the opportunity to serve as the chief academic officer at Prescott College from 2005 to 2022, and so love that place. Um, it offers both on-campus and online programs at the undergraduate, and then online programs at the master's and PhD level. The It's experiential interdisciplinary learning that allows students to self-direct in their learning, um, and also deep integration of experiential learning. So you have two options when you become a new on-campus student at Prescott College. One of them is a orientation that will take you on a backpacking trip for a month that's led by your fellow students or some recent graduates. It's an amazingly transformative orientation experience. Or there's a community-based orientation where you might go to Tucson or Los Angeles or something like that for a more urban orientation. So students who want to have adventures, students who want to learn by doing, students who want to have very close relationships with their fellow students and with their faculty. It's very much cohort-based learning. The calendar itself is structured for experiential learning, where there's small blocks where you could take one course at a time. Um, and that allows you to, the small classes too, allow you to have an entire class fit in the 15-passenger van. And if I'd known about Prescott College, I might have spent a lot more time on river rafts earlier than I did, because there are classes like Water in the West, where you spend a lot of time in canoes and in rafts on the Grand
How
Canyon.
cool is that?
Right.
That's pretty cool. So, how does it, because she just mentioned she doesn't see them recruiting in Mesa, how do they go about getting the word out and connecting with potential future students? Do you have any idea?
I don't know what's happening right now in terms of recruiting. I think, the students and the alumni could be great ambassadors. The Prescott College students and alumni could be great ambassadors to send out to places like Mesa um, to get into the high schools. One of the problems with small liberal arts colleges is we don't tend to spend enough on getting the message out. We tend to spend a lot of money on instruction because that's what we value is the student experience once they're there. But it's hard for institutions like Prescott College or Olivet College, the University of Olivet, where I was last, or even Naropa now, to spend enough on marketing and recruiting to really cut through the noise that's out there
Mhm.
and to attract the right students. So it's a real challenge that Julie mentions.
Yeah, it's kind of I mean, my daughter's company works in marketing, and we find out it's the first budget to go, like it's hard to prioritize marketing money, even though everyone knows it's important. Other things end up
Mhm.
getting a higher priority. So I guess student ambassadors, I think, or alumni ambassadors, are good at getting words out, hopefully. All right.
Completely.
As someone who started in a teaching role but shifted to administration and leadership, what have you learned about navigating that transition? How can you adapt the skills that are important in both roles and develop the new skills that are needed for administration and leadership? Are there safe ways to fail while learning those skills? Good ones.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, Navigating the transition. So my transition was completely accidental, right? I had no intention of becoming an administrator and then found myself, doing it in a really difficult environment where, you're trying to keep all the faculty and staff rowing at the same time that they're all trying to find other jobs because they know the college is closing. And so it was to do it with through relationships, through transparency, through honesty, through listening, and then to have that generate the trust that enabled the support for me to make mistakes. And to then admit when I made those mistakes and try to learn through them, avoid them if I can by listening and making good decisions to begin with, but then to rely upon that trust. I think then, once you kind of get into that role to find the opportunities for professional development that are going to be most useful in your context. In my case, I became a consultant evaluator for the Higher Learning Commission, the regional accreditor, now institutional accreditor, that accredits pretty much all the institutions in the middle of the United States. And then went around and visited institutions of higher education on accreditation visits. I led teams, and I've probably led 50 different um, accreditation evaluations, and then sort of specialized in certain things like specialized visits for change of control, because I saw 10 years ago that things like mergers and acquisitions in higher education were going to be increasingly important. So, to find some way to tailor your own professional development in a way that builds the skills that you think you're going to need going forward. Um, yeah, I guess trust the people around you, build good leaders, right? Always be building your leadership team and building relationships, right? So in facilitation, intentional facilitation of group process, like a strategic planning process or like good meeting process, uh, so that the people trust one another. And then I think that people will support you when you fail, but you'll also find that in education, which can be a conservative kind of approach to shared governance and planning, is designed to preserve knowledge and practice rather than eliminate or transform or blow things up. But if you can build that trust, then you're going to find that you're nimble at the level of your leadership team, your other constituents within the organization, but also at the level of the board. And I think right now that nimbleness in the culture in higher education is perhaps the greatest asset that an institution could generate, because you can change and you can adapt and be creative.
And I have to say, as an outsider, like Paul, it just acts with integrity, in my opinion. And across my whole career, like you might have moments where you're like, how did that jerk get ahead? Or how did that guy get that big position? But it's not laudable, and they're not loved, and they're not trusted, So I see Paul as someone who consistently acts with integrity and earns that trust. And so to me is like, that's what I try to tell my kids and people around me, and I try to strive to, is like that really is what creates that ability needed for administration or leadership. And managing up is as important as managing down, and both of those require trust in both directions. So I think Paul's got that skill in spades, and I do think you can cultivate it personally.
Mhm.
It's a decision that you make
It is.
every single minute. Am I acting with integrity or not?
I love hearing you talk, Paul, about the the era of experimentation that created some of these colleges where you've been. What do you think is coming? What's higher ed going to look like in 5 or 10 years?
Well, I mentioned a period of consolidation. I think that you're going to see um, increased and accelerated closures in amongst the small colleges, or mergers and the creation of systems, the sharing of resources. Um, I think unfortunately that artificial intelligence is going to be driving a lot of changes, both in terms of the kind of marketing and other areas of operations, but also education. I think you need to teach students how to do AI, but do it with ethics and integrity, as well as the problems that are associated with that kind of use of power in the Southwest, certainly water in these large data centers. But I think that a lot of the transformations are already underway. This movement towards more and more access through online. I don't think in-person is going away, but I think that more and more students will be studying online. There's more corporate education that's becoming important, but it's also can be problematic because you can lose a lot of the skills that the actual corporations value most. The ones I was mentioning earlier, like critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communications, that are associated with the kind of older forms. So I see those processes accelerating that I mentioned, in terms of technology, in terms of consolidation of the industry. But I think that many institutions will continue that will be relatively. You will still have, Wildcat Stadium, for example, at the University of Arizona, and you will still have the great red brick factory there in Tucson, and in other locations too. But you'll see increasingly that they have many other operations that are either technologically enabled or international through the kind of collaborations that you can imagine. I think that those collaborations will be increasingly important, both with between institutions, but also with community organizations and with corporations going forward.
And I always have to throw my 2 cents. Can't help myself. So the other thing I think on that is it is already starting pre-AI, that in the corporate world, like you think of New York City corporations, like where I spent a bunch of my life, when we were getting, the 100,000 applicants or the 1,000 applicants, whatever, for that job, what really stood out was someone who could communicate and who could build relationships. Like it was easy enough to have, the programming skill or the
Mhm.
stochastic calculus, projection ability, or, the modeling and that sort of stuff. And now AI obviously is empowering many people who maybe couldn't, program in Python and nanosecond. They don't need to do that. So what really stands out, I think, right now is the interpersonal skills. And I truly believe that it's the Naropa type of university that focuses on that, that's actually going to end up producing more of the superstar leaders, because everyone else will, start looking the same when you can empower yourself with the AI to, achieve some of these skills. So I'm really curious about, the evolution of the universities, and if they'll start realizing that these things are super important, because
Mhm.
it's not really taught in like mainstream, your core curriculum at a regular university isn't like how to speak to other people, how to behave on stage, how to, write a line of poetry with your new teacher standing next to you. I mean, that's like wildly important, I think, in terms of, getting someone some confidence that'll shape their future.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of those sorts of liberal arts learning outcomes are also those things that AI has the most trouble doing effectively. And so there's a kind of a labor market value to that sort of learning too. At the same time that the labor markets already are and will continue to be transformed by AI.
I was so looking forward to this hour, and I'm so happy that, Paul, that you took the time with us. We know you're super busy, and thank you so much for everything that you do.
And likewise, it's so great to see some of the familiar faces and names out there. Looking forward to the next alumni gathering.